Welcome to In-Silico Trials Real Impact, the In-Silico UK podcast that's revolutionizing the way we think about medical innovation. I'm Professor Alejandro Frangi from the University of Manchester, and I'll be your guide through this fascinating world of in-silico technologies. In each episode, we'll dive into cutting-edge research and groundbreaking news that are shaping the future of medical product development and regulation. From computational modeling to simulated clinical trials, we are exploring how digital approaches are transforming healthcare, making it safer, more efficient, more equitable, and incredibly precise. So, whether you're a researcher, regulator, a member of the public, or a patient representative, or simply curious about the future of medicine, tune in as we unravel the complex world of in-silico methods and their real-world impact. Get ready to discover how computer-simulated trials are leading to very real breakthroughs in patient care. In-Silico Trials Real Impact, where algorithms and data are saving lives. Let's begin.
Welcome back, everybody, to the deep dive. You know, we love to go beyond those flashy headlines. And today we're really diving into AI and drug development. I've got a whole bunch of research articles and news stories here. And we're going to figure out with our expert, could the UK be leading this whole healthcare revolution?
Yeah, they're definitely making a splash. You know, the UK government just poured over £6 million into 7 new centers of excellence for regulatory science and innovation.
Wow.
That's a mouthful, so they call them CERSIs.
Okay, CERSIs, got it.
Think of them like these hubs where you've got the top scientists, the tech people, and the regulators all working together.
So instead of everyone kind of doing their own thing in their own little world, these CERSIs are bringing everyone together, the best minds, to really focus on that one big goal, right? Getting those cutting-edge treatments to patients faster and safer. And we're really going to zoom in on 2 of these CERSIs today.
Exactly, and they're tackling 2 of the biggest roadblocks in healthcare right now.
Okay, love it.
We're going to look at Brunel University's CERSI, which is going all in on figuring out how we regulate AI in healthcare.
Interesting.
I mean, think about it. We've got AI diagnostics, smart devices, even apps that are playing a bigger and bigger role in healthcare, every single day.
But AI is constantly learning and changing. So how do you create rules and regulations for something that's constantly evolving?
It's trying to nail Jell-O to a wall, right?
Exactly.
But that is the $1 million question, and that's what Brunel CERSI is really grappling with. They are literally developing those frameworks, the regulatory frameworks for AI in healthcare.
That's huge.
And then the other CERSI we're going to dig into is at the University of Manchester, and they are leading the UK's first In-Silico Regulatory Science and Innovation Center of Excellence.
Okay, so In-Silico, that sounds like something straight out of Star Trek.
Right.
But I have a feeling it's a lot more grounded in reality than warp drive.
It is. It really is. It's all about using computer simulations for drug development.
Yeah.
So imagine this, instead of needing years of lab work and, tons of patients for clinical trials, what if you could run those trials virtually inside a computer?
So basically creating a virtual lab where you can test out new drugs and treatments.
You got it.
Okay. And that could potentially really speed up the whole process of getting new medicines to the people who desperately need them.
Exactly. And it's not like some far-off future this is happening right now.
Wow.
And it could have a massive impact, not just in the UK, but globally.
Okay, so let's hit pause for a second and think about why this is so important. The traditional way of getting new drugs and devices approved is notoriously slow and expensive.
It's a huge problem. The average drug takes about 12 years to go from the lab to the pharmacy.
12 years.
And a huge chunk of that time and money is spent on testing. We're talking 30% of the total cost just on testing.
Can you imagine waiting over a decade for a treatment that could potentially save your life? That's the reality that these CERSIs are trying to change.
Yeah. Exactly. The potential impact here is enormous. We could be talking about faster cures, lower drug prices, and even treatments for diseases that are currently considered incurable.
So we've got these 2 incredible CERSIs, each with a slightly different focus, but both aiming for the same goal: revolutionizing healthcare.
And both using cutting-edge technology in ways that we've never seen before. But how are they actually doing it? That's what we're going to explore next.
Yes, so let's start with Brunel University and their work with AI. What are they actually doing to bring AI-powered healthcare into the mainstream, safely and effectively?
Yeah, and it's not just about the technology itself. It's about building trust, creating guidelines, and figuring out how to measure something that's constantly evolving. It's a huge challenge, but Brunel's CERSI is taking it on, and they're already making some serious headway.
Okay, so let's break this down. We've got these incredible AI algorithms that can diagnose diseases, personalize treatment plans, and even predict patient outcomes. But how do you make sure those algorithms are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing, especially when they're constantly learning and adapting?
Yeah, that's the big question. It's a completely different ball game from regulating like traditional drugs or devices
Right.
with a pill.
Yeah.
Its chemical composition, its mechanism of action, it's all very defined.
You know exactly what it is.
But with AI, the lines get blurry.
Right, because the AI is changing all the time. It's learning from new data, refining its algorithms, becoming more accurate.
Precisely. And that's both the beauty and the challenge of AI.
Yeah.
It has the potential to be incredibly powerful and beneficial, but it also needs very careful oversight to make sure it's safe and it's effective. And that's where Brunel CERSI is stepping in. They're pioneering new regulatory approaches that are designed for the unique challenges of AI in healthcare.
And one of the things I found really interesting in the research is this idea of regulatory sandboxes. It sounds like a pretty playful name for something so serious.
Yeah, it is a bit of a catchy term, but it's a very powerful concept. A regulatory sandbox is essentially a safe space where companies that are developing AI-powered healthcare products can test them out in a controlled environment and get feedback and guidance from regulators.
So instead of companies developing their AI in isolation and then hoping it gets approved by regulators, they're working together right from the start.
Exactly. It's a much more collaborative and iterative process. So companies can get real-world feedback early on. They can identify potential risks or biases in their algorithms, and they can refine their products to meet those regulatory standards before they even hit the market.
That sounds like a win-win for everybody involved.
Right.
Companies can get their products to market faster, regulators can ensure patient safety, and ultimately patients benefit from having access to these innovative technologies. It's like a fast track for innovation, but with all the necessary safety checks in place.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about finding that right balance,
Yeah.
between fostering innovation and protecting patients. And these regulatory sandboxes are a key part of that equation. But Brunel CERSI isn't just focused on safety. They're also looking at how to measure the effectiveness of AI in healthcare.
Okay, that makes sense because it's one thing to make sure an AI algorithm isn't going to harm anyone, but it's another thing entirely to make sure that it's actually making a positive difference in people's lives.
Exactly. It's not enough for an AI diagnostic tool to be accurate. It also needs to demonstrate that it's actually improving patient outcomes, leading to earlier diagnoses, more effective treatments, or just better overall health.
So how do you measure something like that, especially when AI is constantly learning and changing?
That's a great question, and there's no easy answer.
Right.
But Brunel CERSI is exploring different approaches, including real-world data analysis and long-term monitoring of AI systems to track their performance and impact over time.
So it's not just a one-time approval. They're constantly evaluating these AI systems to make sure they're continuing to meet the highest standards of safety and effectiveness.
That's right. It's a dynamic and ongoing process because as AI continues to evolve, so too will the ways in which we regulate it.
This is such important work because, let's be honest, AI is going to play a huge role in healthcare in the future, whether we like it or not.
Yeah.
So it's crucial that we get the regulatory framework right from the start.
Couldn't agree more. Brunel CERSI is laying the groundwork for a future where AI can be seamlessly integrated into healthcare systems, benefiting both patients and healthcare providers.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities, but I also know that some people are hesitant about AI and healthcare. They worry about machines making decisions about their health or about their data being misused.
Yeah, I understand those concerns. It's important to acknowledge them and address them head on.
Right.
And that's something that Brunel's CERSI is very mindful of. They're not just thinking about the technical aspects of AI regulation, but also the ethical and societal implications.
That's reassuring to hear because at the end of the day, technology should serve humanity, not the other way around.
Absolutely. It's about finding that sweet spot, where innovation and human values intersect.
Okay, so we've spent a good amount of time talking about Brunel and their work with AI, but let's not forget about the other groundbreaking CERSI we're exploring today, the one at the University of Manchester focused on in-silico trials.
Right. This is where things get really interesting because in-silico trials have the potential to completely transform the drug development process as we know it.
And we touched on it earlier, but can you remind us exactly what in-silico trials are? It still sounds a little bit like science fiction to me.
Think of it like a virtual laboratory. Instead of conducting experiments on cells in a petri dish or on animals, in-silico trials use computer simulations to model how a drug might behave in the human body.
So they're basically creating digital avatars of human beings and testing out new drugs on those avatars.
It's more sophisticated than that. These simulations are incredibly detailed, taking into account things like a person's genetics, their metabolism, their lifestyle, and even the specific characteristics of the disease they're trying to treat.
Wow, so they can basically create a virtual representation of any type of patient they want and test out different drug combinations to see what works best.
Exactly. And they can do all of this without exposing a single human being to potential risks.
That's a game changer, especially when you consider how long and expensive traditional clinical trials are and how many patients have to volunteer their time and their bodies to participate in those trials.
Yeah, it's a much more efficient and ethical approach, and it has the potential to significantly accelerate the drug development process.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this is such a big deal, but if it's so great, why isn't everyone already doing it? What are the challenges that the University of Manchester's CERSI is trying to overcome?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is that in-silico trials are still a relatively new technology. And as with any new technology, there's a bit of a learning curve. Scientists need to develop the skills and expertise to create and run these simulations effectively.
Right, because you can't just throw a bunch of data into a computer and expect magic to happen. You need people who understand the complexities of the human body, the intricacies of drug development, and how to translate all of that into a virtual environment.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of validation. Just because a drug works well in a simulation doesn't automatically mean it's going to work the same way in a real human being.
So how do you bridge that gap, between the virtual world and the real world? How do you know if the results of an in-silico trial are actually reliable?
That's one of the key questions that the University of Manchester's CERSI is trying to answer. They're working on developing rigorous validation methods to ensure that in-silico trials are predictive of real-world outcomes.
So they're basically creating the standards and guidelines that will allow in-silico trials to be accepted by regulators and the wider scientific community.
Precisely, they're building the foundation for a future where in-silico trials can become a mainstream part of the drug development process.
And that could have massive implications for how we treat diseases, how we develop new drugs, and how we think about healthcare in general.
Absolutely. We could be on the cusp of a paradigm shift in healthcare thanks to the pioneering work of these CERSIs.
This is all so fascinating, but before we get too carried away with the future, let's take a closer look at what the University of Manchester is doing right now to make that future a reality.
Okay.
They're not just sitting in a lab crunching numbers, they're actively partnering with industry leaders, regulatory agencies, and even international organizations to push this technology forward.
Yeah, it's a truly collaborative effort bringing together all the key players to make sure that in-silico trials reach their full potential.
And they're not just talking about it. They're putting their ideas into action through a really interesting initiative called the In-Silico Airlock Initiative.
That's right.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. What is this airlock initiative all about? It sounds kind of like a space mission.
It is kind of like a mission, but instead of exploring outer space, they're exploring the vast potential of in-silico trials.
I like it.
The Airlock Initiative is a pilot program that involves 10 industry-led projects that are using in-silico methods to test new drugs and devices.
So they're giving companies a chance to put this technology to the test, in real-world scenarios, while still having that support and guidance from the CERSI.
Exactly. It's a way to gather evidence to demonstrate the value of in-silico trials, to refine the methodology, and to work out any kinks in the process.
It's like a test drive for the future of drug development.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And the results of these pilot projects could have a ripple effect throughout the entire healthcare industry.
This is some seriously impressive stuff, it sounds like. The University of Manchester is really leading the charge when it comes to in-silico trials.
They are, and their work is paving the way for a future where new drugs and treatments can be developed faster, cheaper, and more effectively than ever before.
I'm eager to see what comes out of these pilot projects. It feels like we're on the verge of a major breakthrough in healthcare.
It's an exciting time to be following these developments, and the implications for patients, for the healthcare industry, and for society as a whole are enormous.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today, from AI regulation to virtual clinical trials. It's clear that these two CERSIs are at the forefront of a healthcare revolution, but where do we go from here? What are the big questions that still need to be answered, and what are the potential pitfalls we need to be aware of as we move forward?
Well, those are the questions that we're going to tackle in our final segment.
Yeah.
We'll delve into the ethical considerations, the potential challenges, and the long-term implications of these groundbreaking technologies. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been talking about these incredible centers of excellence in the UK, one focused on AI and the other on in-silico trials.
Right.
It really does feel like we're getting a glimpse into the future of healthcare, a future where these really powerful technologies and, smart regulations could team up to make a huge difference in people's lives.
Yeah, it's about, moving beyond the hype and really digging into the nuts and bolts of how these technologies can be developed and implemented responsibly, because it's not just about the science, it's about the impact on real people.
Exactly. And we've talked about some of the potential benefits like faster drug development, more personalized treatments, lower costs, even reduced reliance on animal testing.
Right.
But I think it's important to acknowledge, with any new technology, there are potential downsides or unintended consequences that we really need to be aware of.
Absolutely. One of the big concerns with AI, for example, is the potential for bias. If the data that's used to train these algorithms is biased, then the algorithms themselves will be biased. And that could lead to unfair or even harmful outcomes for certain groups of people.
So it's not just about the technology itself, it's about the human element, the people who are developing and using these technologies. And that brings us to the question of regulation. We've talked about those regulatory sandboxes that Brunel CERSI is creating for AI.
Right.
And the validation methods that Manchester CERSI is developing for in-silico trials. But are those enough?
Well, it's a good start, but it's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
As these technologies continue to evolve, so too will the regulations that govern them.
Yeah.
And it's really important to have open and ongoing dialogue between the scientists, the regulators, and the public to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and that these technologies are developed and used in a way that benefits everyone.
And one of the things that struck me as we were doing all this research is that these CERSIs aren't just focused on the UK. They're actively collaborating with international organizations like the FDA and the European Medicines Agency.
Yeah, that's a key part of their mission because these technologies don't stop at national borders.
Yeah.
The impact of AI and in-silico trials will be felt globally. So it's crucial to have international collaboration and harmonization of regulations to make sure that these technologies are developed and used safely and effectively everywhere.
It's a big task, but it's such an important one because the potential benefits of these technologies are simply too great to ignore. If we can use AI to diagnose diseases earlier, if we can use in-silico trials to develop those life-saving treatments faster, if we can make healthcare more accessible and affordable for everyone.
Then we have a moral imperative to pursue those goals, but we need to do it thoughtfully, carefully, and with a deep understanding of both the potential benefits and the potential risks.
And that's where these CERSIs come in. They're not just pushing the boundaries of science and technology. They're also pushing the boundaries of how we think about healthcare, how we regulate it, and how we ensure that it benefits everyone.
It's a truly holistic approach, and I think it's one that'll have a lasting impact on the future of healthcare.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's safe to say that the UK is making some pretty bold moves in the healthcare space. They're investing in cutting-edge technologies. They're fostering collaboration, between scientists, regulators, and industry leaders. And they're taking a global perspective on the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be watching these developments unfold, and I think it's a sign of things to come. The future of healthcare is being shaped right now, and it's looking brighter than ever.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.